Yeah, so recording. Welcome to Pax Europiana. This morning we have a very special guest from the Czech Republic, David Stulik, who is from the European Values think tank. And now, of course, it's very important time to express solidarity with the Czech Republic because of this crisis with the Russian Federation. And I'm very happy that you took time this morning to talk to Pax Europiana. Please, David, can you introduce yourself and also present the think tank you are working for?
Right. So I'm David Stulik, who presently working as the senior analyst and the head of Eastern European program at the Prague-based think tank European Values Center for Security Policy. It's a non-governmental institution that exists for 15 years. And I would say our major focus nowadays is on analyzing and monitoring foreign malign influence of mainly such countries like Russia and China. We are trying to cover all their, let's say, hybrid operations activities that they are conducting in third countries, including Central Europe, including Eastern Europe. We have a lot of similar, let's say, contacts all across the world. So we are also working at the global level. We are now, for example, developing a new China project program that is going to be indeed a kind of a global affair. And what might still be interesting for your listeners and viewers is the fact that I've been working for 12 years in Ukraine as the EU diplomat, as a press officer at the EU delegation there. So this is briefly about me.
Perfect, perfect. Thanks a lot. Now let me ask you about the current crisis, because the world was shocked to hear that Russia is doing these terrible terrorist acts in your country, in a NATO and in EU country, and you responded very courageously now in the last month. Can you describe the context and your Czech response towards this terrorist attack?
I mean, we all here were completely shocked, and I personally myself could not believe when I was listening to that extraordinary press conference of Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, who is also a Minister of Interior. So what has happened? We have to go back to 2014 when there were two huge explosions at the ammunition depots in Moravia. That completely destroyed that site, and unfortunately 2 people died because of these explosions. And there was an investigation going on only until 2015 because the police and investigators couldn't find any evidence of any, let's say, external action, right? So the investigation was closed. It only was again renewed back in 2018 because then it was the year when the Skripal's family was poisoned in the UK, and the identity of several GRU, which is the Russian military intelligence service, was disclosed. And in that moment, the Czech investigators reopened the files because the same people were in the Czech Republic back in 2014, and they visited the site of these explosions. So there was an immediate, let's say, suspicion that these people, this military unit of the Russian Federation, might have been also involved in these explosions. So since 2018 till October 2020, investigators again were working on the site, collecting more evidence, and they got the confirmation that indeed these 2 concrete people were at the site. They most probably planted kind of explosive devices in these ammunition depots. But of course, there were more people working with them. Also, their identity was recently disclosed by, for example, Bellingcat. So the Czech authorities got the final confirmation that Russian military service, military unit GRU, is in charge of these explosions. And on 20th of April, this information was then released, as I said, by Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. So there is only one version of what police is investigating, and this is the version that these explosions were caused by official Russian military unit. And that's why the Czech reaction was so, I would say, unprecedented. We have never ever expelled such a large number of diplomats from one single country because that was perceived as a major sign to Russians that the importance and significance of this act, in which 2 people were killed, is so huge that we can't simply, turn over the page, expel 1, 2, 3 diplomats, and that will be everything. No. So the government then decided to take this, I would say, rather principled, resolute steps in order to send the right signal to Moscow.
David, the world was also shocked to learn that the Prague embassy of the Russian Federation is a kind of forward operation base into NATO for the Russian state secret service, for the military state secret service. The same people who were doing the Skripal still around. And what is the nature of the Russian embassy in Prague?
I mean, they had more than 135 diplomats, plus, of course, they
135.
had 135. Germany has 25 diplomats here in Prague, while 46% of our trade is with Germany and less than 2% of trade is with Russia. So you can see this disproportionate relations and of this size of this embassy here. Actually, it was the largest Russian embassy in Central Europe. It couldn't be even compared with Berlin or with Vienna.
And you sent now
And
how many?
of course, Czech. Now we kind of issued a ceiling for the size of Russian embassy. So it's based on Vienna Convention of Diplomatic Immunities and Rights. It's Article 11, which allows the host country to introduce this cap for the size of the embassy to the same level as we have in Moscow. So right now, it would mean that there will be something like 7 diplomats plus some technical staff. So altogether, there might be like 23, 24, 29, maybe a little bit more people with diplomatic immunity working here. So that means that more than 80 diplomats of the Russian Federation will have to be sent back home. But with this kind of a deadline that we issued for this cap, it is the end of May, and we do not, let's say, expel concrete people. We leave it up on the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs to decide who will stay and who will be gone. So this is also to the discretion of the Russian authorities to kind of determine who is important, who is not. But indeed, that was a problem in the past, and the Czech counterintelligence service, as well as the military intelligence services, were pointing every year in their annual reports to this problem, that the embassy is oversized, that 1/3 of these people are, let's say, professional officers of three Russian services, mentioned GRU, then External Intelligence Service, SVR, as well as the counterintelligence FSB. So these people were operating from the Czech Republic, not only on the territory of the Czech Republic. There were facts documented that they traveled also to Austria, to Germany, Poland, Slovakia, and maybe even further, because we have the Schengen space as Schengen zone, so they could have traveled freely to also other countries. And why they kind of settled down in Prague, in the Czech Republic, because they also have consulates in Brno and in Karlovy Vary. So basically, the conditions here are very, I would say, favorable for them. There is also a large Russian minority diaspora living here, more than 44,000 people. Not all of them are these, let's say, supporters of Putin's regime. I would say even contrary, many of them are the opponents who found the refuge here. So still, it's a kind of a good kind of environment to work with many compatriots, to have a networks of, for example, Russian IT companies here or Russian legal companies, so that it's quite useful for the infrastructure that you need for the operation of these services, plus language, plus the culture, plus also some historical affinities, as well as the, I would say, until recently, a low level of monitoring and screening of foreign investments. So Czech Republic is one of the top 10 money laundromats for Russians. So they are washing, laundering money through the Czech Republic, through the real estates, through the banking system, and also through the networks of thousands of companies, that shell companies that have been established here by different Russian, let's say, citizens, services, and other, let's say, private institutions. So they had here kind of, I would say, a very favorable environment to work in as well. But the main asset was the president. The Czech president is still the asset, because he was significantly hindering the work of law enforcement agencies, of our secret services, that were pointing to this fact of the oversight of the Russian embassy. So they had a kind of a protector. I mean, Russians had a kind of a protector on the side of President Zeman.
Despite your relative measured response to this crisis, the Russian state has now put up a list of hostile states, yeah, and put you somehow in this very unfriendly category. What was the reason for that, and how you think this is appropriate to do that?
I mean, if you followed the Czech-Russian relations for the last couple of years, we were on a kind of a downward tendency. We had a kind of downward tendency. So we were saying that the bottom was still not reached, and now the bottom is also very low, because we have had quite, I would say, fierce and quite emotional discussions about the past, about the events of the Second World War. So Russian authorities, official authorities, were targeting the Czech Republic as one of the countries in Central Europe that are trying to revisit or rewrite the history of the World War II. Also, we have had similar issues with regard to 1968 with Prague Spring. So the relations were quite already bad before. So now, with this kind of unprecedented act of expulsion, the Russian official authorities got really infuriated, and they are responding in many ways towards these acts. For example, they canceled a big number of parking permits for the Czech diplomats in Moscow, and it's a huge problem. And one of these acts was this mentioned placement on that list of hostile countries. And it has practical consequences already, because that means that the Czech embassy and Czech consulates cannot employ local Russian staff in Russia. So basically, some of these facilities of the Czech Republic in Moscow were already closed down, because without, let's say, Russian technical personnel, they cannot operate. And they can't just simply hire and send the Czech staff, because these people will not get the visas. So in that way, we are already kind of blocked with representing, I don't know, Czech companies in Moscow through the so-called Czech House. That was a kind of a part of affiliated part of the Czech embassy. So these are the practical consequences of these, let's say, latest Russian decisions to put us on that list. I mean, here in the Czech Republic, like Czechs always love to do, they started to joke that why it took such a long time, that now we are in a very good company there. And the week after, the Russian authorities put on their sanctions list, on their ban list, also the vice president of the European Commission, a Czech lady, Věra Jourová, which also was seen as another hostile act towards, let's say, the Czech Republic, because the vice president of the European Commission is rather a close ally of our prime minister, Babiš. So they both come from the same party. So it is also perceived as another kind of a attack or hit on the Czech, let's say, interests.
And which other countries have supported Czech? Which of your allies in the EU and NATO have supported the Czech Republic now in this crisis with Russia?
I mean, we were very happy to see, for example, the first reaction coming from Slovakia. It was again perceived very warmly and as a kind of a confirmation of very close relations with our former federal partner. Then they were followed by Baltic states, and later on also by Romania and Bulgaria. And I think here we have to also mention that now a similar investigation has been kind of revealed in Bulgaria, because there were also big explosions of these ammunition depots back in 2014, 2015, but there were 15 casualties in these attacks. And again, the same people were spotted around. I mean, the same GRU officers were on the site when these explosions happened there. So these were the major countries that kind of, let's say, supported us. In the meantime, there were quite, I would say, tough and very timely and very, I would say, concrete statements made by the EU and later on also by the NATO. So there was a, I would say, a wider wave of expression of solidarity, but only these 6 countries kind of followed the same pattern, and they expelled the Russian diplomats. What we hear now is such a fact that the UK is also considering a similar act. But I think that would be everything at the multilateral level, at the NATO or at the EU levels. I think we shouldn't expect kind of an orchestrated and coordinated approach like it was back in 2018 with the Skripal's case. But again, this is up to the Czech diplomacy, up to the Czech government to, for example, clearly ask for such an assistance. And so far, this hasn't happened to such a, let's say, degree like it was the case with the UK, when by then Theresa May personally called all the EU leaders and NATO leaders, and she asked for such a expression of solidarity. In our case, there is a possibility that the Czech Prime Minister Babiš might ask for similar assistance at the forthcoming European Council, but we'll see.
David, let me ask you about the other courageous step you took. You excluded Rosatom, the Russian state energy company, from the Dukovany power plant project. That was certainly hurting Russian interest in the Czech Republic a lot. So how came that decision, and do you think that was the right decision?
Actually, I need to correct you, because that was a trick that was played with all of us. Rosatom was only excluded from the security screening, which is a pre-stage for the real tender, for the real procurement. Of course, the government presented it as Rosatom is completely excluded, but this pre-stage step is being taken right now, and indeed Rosatom would not receive the questionnaire for this stage, but the decision on the real genuine tender public procurement will be taken only by the next government, and they will not be bound by this current decision that Rosatom is out of the game for this nuclear tender. But let me also say that this is not only about Rosatom, but of course, if they are excluded, it would definitely harm their interests, and but only in the case that indeed the Czech Republic constructs and expands this nuclear power station. There are different voices whether we do need that nuclear power station. So similar tender was already cancelled in the past. So we'll see how all this issue is going to develop. So nothing is, I would say, nothing is decided. And as this government is saying, the proper decision how to go on in the future with the energy security will need to be taken by the new government that we will have after this year's October parliamentary elections.
Thanks. Also, let me understand the situation with the general supply of nuclear fuel towards Temelin and towards the other power plant. It's also from Rosatom, yes, as I understand. And I thought that this could be an important leverage to really hurt Russian interest to buy in the future from your NATO allies, from your European allies, or from Canada. Obviously, Canada, Australia, other countries could also supply you with nuclear fuel. And wouldn't that be an appropriate response in the future?
Well, actually, this is a very practical problem or issue, because we are indeed buying nuclear fuel from Tvel. It's a kind of a daughter company of Rosatom, and we will continue to buy it from them. Also, we have stocks of that fuel, because that fuel is suited for the technological use with Russian technologies that we are using. So there were attempts to switch to other, let's say, producers of this nuclear fuel, but it was extremely technically demanding and also extremely comparatively more expensive than buying it from Russians. And I think that Russians are also interested in selling it because it's another kind of an income of the hard currency for them, and then they can't simply stop these production lines. So here it's like with the gas that Soviet Union was selling to Western Bloc during the Cold War, even in the, let's say, the most tense moments, the Soviet or Russian gas was floating to the European communities. So because here both the buyer and the seller are interested in this kind of a deal. So this is rather excluded as a tool that could be used as a leverage towards the Russian Federation.
Let me ask you about the role of the Czech president. You mentioned him already, but recently there were also big protests against President Zeman. And could you explain a bit what exactly his position is and why he is acting so against European solidarity in many ways?
I mean, here President Zeman kind of finally turned down his mask because they were suspicious among media, journalists, experts, other politicians that he is indeed defending the interests of the authoritarian regimes, again, mainly the Russian Federation and China. But for the society, for the population, this was not so important. He has been elected on the basis of his domestic program, not because of his foreign, let's say, foreign policy views. But now, when these explosions became a part of a domestic policy or domestic development, when it indeed touched the people emotionally, and as I said, the fact that 2 people died, were killed, right? So this is something that makes the society extremely sensitive towards these issues. So now a majority, for the very first time of Zeman's term in the office, for the very first time, the majority of the public opinion does not agree with him. This is also a unique moment because until now he was enjoying quite a, I would say, high degree of support and trust, but now only 20% of the people agree with his arguments. And his arguments are that the version that we heard is not proven, that there might be other versions. And he's kind of casting doubts about the official version. So, and he is exactly playing in the hands of the Russian propaganda because his statements that no evidence was presented about the role of Russian officers, that was immediately picked up by Russian media. And we see again parallel media realities. Back in Russia, the narratives are that it was probably done by the American Secret Services, that the Czech Republic is a kind of a puppet in the hands of Americans, and that only brave Czech president is able and willing to say the truth. Here in the Czech Republic, I think that almost everybody now has a kind of a clear opinion about Zeman, and that's why we had these protests all over the country against him. But you know, Zeman doesn't mind. He has still only 2 years in the office. He can't be re-elected. And we know that the people in his, let's say, closest circles, people who don't have security clearance, who have been working in Russia and Soviet Union in the past, people who have close links with Russian state companies, they are now exploiting the fact that he's a president to the maximum. So that's why they will be using these 2 last years of his president's office for pushing through the Russian interests as much as possible. I mean, now with the public opinion that is rather hostile, it will be extremely difficult for them, for him, for Zeman. But again, he, as a president, will have I would say, a big say after these October elections, because it is the president who appoints the designated prime minister. And again, we saw it in the past that he is able to play with the constitution's stipulations in different way. He was not respecting deadlines. He used his own interpretation of certain articles of the constitution. So here we'll definitely see him in a game again after the parliamentary elections this October.
So exciting times coming up this October. What's your prediction for October? Will there be clear majorities or it will be complicated coalition management again?
I mean, we have a very dynamic situation here. Extremely dynamic year, half a year is ahead of us, because according to the latest public opinion polls, the Social Democrats that are in the government now, they will not make it to the parliament. Babish's party, which used to be the largest, let's say, party for the last 7 years, is now losing in the polls, and they are coming second. And in the meantime, there were two democratic opposition blocs formed, consisting of 5 parliamentary parties. There is a liberal centrist bloc, and there is also a conservative bloc. And these two blocks have a now high chance of kind of winning the elections and forming a majority government. But the situation is dynamic. And why? Because of pandemic. The government support went down because of the toughest measures that we saw in February, March. But these measures are now, let's say, bringing the dividends. And Prime Minister Babiš is going to definitely use this fact that the situation has indeed improved so dramatically. The vaccination is now reaching unprecedented levels. So I think this will again help him to regain some support. But the situation is dynamic. A week ago, we saw the European Commission's audit that says that Prime Minister Babiš is in the conflict of interest, that his companies were receiving EU subsidies and EU supports rather, let's say, illegally. So that again is hitting his reputation significantly. And here, these two opposition blocs are now kind of also, they do disagree with each other how to handle the situation. And which is very unfortunate because one bloc, the conservatives, are saying that they should cast a vote of non-confidence for Babiš. And if this happens, then let's say 5 months before the elections, we will be without a government. And then again, it is the president who will form his technocratic government. And you can imagine that these people in his circles and he himself will use these 5 months or maybe more time before the new government is formed for pushing these things like the nuclear power tender, maybe still Sputnik 5. And these might be the steps that would be very difficult to kind of reverse. So the situation here will remain very dynamic, I would say, till the end of the year.
Let me ask you about your expectations of the new government on behalf of foreign policy, especially Ukraine, because since 2014, the Czech Republic was one of the most important supporters of Ukrainian freedom, of European Ukraine. And can you say what you expect, what will change, or will you continue to be a strong supporter of Ukraine also in the 2020s?
First of all, let me thank you for this statement, because, for example, in Ukraine, the Czech Republic is perceived through the statements of President Zeman, who doesn't have any constitutional competencies in the foreign policy. It is indeed the government that has these competencies, and the Czech governments have been very, I would say, consistent in this policy of supporting Ukraine. And here I will have only good news for Ukrainians, that all major parties that could form a government after October elections, they all have more or less the same position with regard to the role the EU, the NATO should play in the eastern part of Europe. They all will support territorial integrity of Ukraine, so there won't be any changes. I would even say that contrary, we might just see more Euro-Atlantic or more EU-oriented policies. So there might be more, let's say, I would say, more constructive positions of the Czech governments on many issues that are on the agenda of the EU. So we will not see a kind of a backtracking in the Czech foreign policy.
That's very good news. Also, let me ask you about the Czech policy of the labor market opening towards Ukraine, because after Poland, you are, to my knowledge, the second country which has been relatively open for Ukrainians to work legally in the Czech Republic. Will you continue this policy?
We will have to continue this policy because we still have the second or maybe the lowest unemployment in the whole EU. The pandemic and the lockdown showed how dependent we are on migrants, foreign migrants' work. The Czech companies are still lacking thousands, maybe dozens of thousands of labor force. And since Ukraine is also culturally, linguistically quite close, and the Ukrainians are the second largest minority here after Slovaks, I would say that the Czech business will be pushing the government for issuing more labor permits and working visas for Ukrainians. So this policy will need to be continued. So there is no way about that.
The Ukrainian government is now, especially in the pandemic, seeing much more future inside the European Union. And after successfully now having signed and concluded the DCFTA, they would like to be EU potential candidate status, similar like Bosnia and Kosovo, to move a step further closer towards the European Union. Do you see support for that in the Czech Republic?
At the level of this kind of a public or societal knowledge, I would say yes, but there is I would say, widespread, I would say, consensus that the Ukraine should have this so-called European or EU perspective. So then the Czech society is rather in favor of that. But in practice, I mean, when I'm looking at these issues, I think that the Ukrainians have everything in their hands. I mean, they need to successfully complement and complete reforms in many areas in order to bring themselves closer to the EU standards. And this cannot be done by the public opinion in the EU. It can be done only by the Ukrainian governments, by the Ukrainian society. So instead of like continued pushes for acknowledging this European perspective, and it is acknowledged actually in the association agreement, but it doesn't provide the guarantee of a membership perspective. The European aspirations are acknowledged. So then the Ukrainians have it in their hands. If they are fast and efficient in implementing these reforms, the faster they will resemble the EU countries or the countries that are part of the European economic area, like Norway, Switzerland, Iceland. So here I would say that it is mainly in the hands of Ukrainians to deliver not words, but concrete deeds and concrete steps, especially in that reforms agenda.
Ukraine under President Poroshenko has put in the constitution it wants to be a NATO member. And now in the current crisis, when Russia built up 100,000 troops at the Russian-Ukrainian border, there was emergency calls to join NATO from the Ukrainian new President Zelensky. Do you see the opportunity for getting a NATO map for Ukraine in the close future?
Unfortunately, I don't. There will be the summit in the mid-June in Brussels. And the decision to give this kind of a pre-accession step or guarantee to Ukraine and Georgia, the so-called membership action plan, needs to be approved by consensus. So all NATO member states must be in favor. And I don't see here, unfortunately for Ukraine, this sort of a consensus. But also we have to realize that the NATO is something different than the EU, because NATO is indeed about a collective defense. And if Ukraine is out of any system of collective defense, there is a vacuum. And the physical science proves that every vacuum is sooner or later being filled in with something else. And this is a kind of a very important moment for bringing Ukraine closer to the NATO, because otherwise it would send a very wrong signal towards Russia, like it happened in 2008, that after Bucharest summit, Russia entered the territory of Georgia and occupies until now 10% and maybe more, 10% I think, of the Georgian territory. So Ukraine, in terms of, let's say, collective defense, indeed should be incorporated, in my view, into this NATO kind of a collective defense, because then we would see actually contrary thing than Russian propaganda says. It will not lead to the escalation of the conflict. contrary, it will be a part of the, let's say, decrease of hostilities and fighting in eastern Ukraine, like it happened with the delivery of the first, let's say, lethal weapons. When these weapons were provided to Ukraine army, the size and the intensity of fighting decreased because the Russian separatist troops were not risking their people, their equipment being hit by these, let's say, high-tech weapons that were delivered to Ukrainian army. So it would actually lead to de-escalation if Ukraine is a part of the NATO, because then Russia will think twice whether to kind of attack or provoke Ukraine for any, let's say, escalation of the conflict.
David, the Czech Republic, Poland, and the Slovak Republic, Hungary, in 1992, after your transformation started, you were invited, or you formed the so-called Central European Free Trade Agreement, and it still exists, and it's now comprising the Balkan accession countries and Moldova. And there's a debate about Ukraine possible joining that and moving closer with the allies from Southeastern Europe in a kind of Balkan backdoor to join the NATO and EU in various associations which already exist in Southeastern Europe, but it was never done, unfortunately. Do you think there is a possibility to get Ukraine into the Central European Free Trade Agreement?
I would say that it would be also beneficial for Ukrainians, because CEFTA was a kind of a waiting room where these four countries were able to practice the EU-like mechanisms and standards with regard to trade. And it is always easier to integrate different, let's say, free trade zones together than each country separately. So for Ukraine, this would also give another boost for its trade, especially with the Southern Balkan countries. Plus, as well, it would give Ukraine some more, let's say, experience with the EU-like standards, norms, and procedures. Ukraine already has a free trade zone with the EU, but the more Ukraine is participating in different free zones at the multilateral level, the better for the country. It means both experience as well as the practical trade economic benefits.
David, your country, Czech Republic, was the pioneer to join NATO already in 1999, and it was a big success story. And then it was created the Vilnius Group to bring other 7 countries towards NATO in 2004. And then there was the Adriatic Charter created to bring the Balkan countries into NATO. And one of the ideas to integrate Ukraine into the Adriatic Charter of NATO pre-accession in order to connect it more with Croatia, Macedonia, Albania, and these countries in order to build an alliance with Southeastern European pro-NATO countries. Do you think that would be a good intermediate step for Ukraine's NATO accession?
Definitely. I think the more similar initiatives they are, the better for Ukraine. It will be more, let's say, organically linked and integrated in various of these, let's say, regional groups. Ukraine is also expanding and developing its cooperation with other, for example, Black Sea countries like Romania and Bulgaria that are also members of the EU and of the NATO. And in that way, the different regions, especially there in Southeastern Europe, are being put together. So that's quite important, I would say, step for Ukraine to be part of these, let's say, communities. Also, Ukraine joined, as another example, European Energy Community. That was first of all meant for Balkan countries. And now Ukraine, together with Moldova, they are also members of this energy community, meaning that now they apply the EU acquis communautaire, EU energy legislation, also on the territory of Ukraine. And it also has a practical, let's say, security consequences, because then Ukraine is a part of the European energy market. That means that, for example, gas companies that are buying Russian gas, they are now buying it at the Ukrainian-Russian borders. Before, they were buying it at the border of Slovakia with Ukraine, or Hungary with Ukraine, or Romania with Ukraine. So all these kind of steps are kind of organically integrating Ukraine into these European structures and mechanisms, which is quite important also from the, let's say, people's officials' point of view. The Ukrainian officials are more and more exposed to contacts with their European counterparts. This is also very helpful for them to kind of get this European experience, this European exposure.
David, let me ask you about Austria and the Czech-Austrian relations. And are you satisfied with the response Austria has shown to you, to the Czech Republic during this crisis now, during the expulsion of the Russian diplomats? What do you think about the Austrian security policy, the Austrian solidarity with the Czech Republic, and our response towards Russian aggression in Ukraine?
I mean, here we have to be realistic that your country is a neutral country that is trying to keep good working relations with third countries, including the Russian Federation. So here we didn't expect too much from the Austrian foreign ministry or from the government. I think that also Austria didn't expel any single diplomat back in 2018, I mean, any Russian diplomat, as a response to Skripal's poisoning. So here we don't have too many illusions that Austria would be acting like the Baltic states, for example. So I wouldn't say that there was some sort of disillusion or disappointment with the Austrian position on the latest, let's say, case with these explosions. Because also on the other issues, the Czech Prime Minister, Czech government has quite good working relations with your government. It concerns the issues like, I don't know, migration policy, or also the issue of the equal and just distribution of the COVID vaccines. So here I would say the Czech government is very much acting in accordance with the Austrian government. So there is some sort of a harmony. And I think also both prime ministers, your chancellor and our prime minister, they have quite good personal relations. So we have to distinguish different, let's say, aspects, levels, and issues of the cooperation between two of our countries.
David, let me ask you about Austrian neutrality in the European Union, because we have also this mutual defense clause, the Article 42 in the European Union. How relevant is Austrian neutrality in the view of the Czech Republic in 2021, still today as a EU member? And wouldn't you also agree that the option is about time for Austria to join NATO?
I think here Austria is in a very privileged, I would say, geographical position, like Switzerland. You are basically neighboring with countries that are part of these collective, let's say, defensive structures of the NATO. So for you, this is a kind of a, let's say, protective shield that is kind of providing or contributing to your security. So I here perfectly understand the Austrian, let's say, hesitance to kind of think about joining the NATO, because indeed it wouldn't kind of change too significantly your ability to increase your resilience or security in the future. So I think this is also this is also understood here as a granted fact that we have to take it into account. And I don't think that somebody here would be in the Czech Republic would be sincerely wishing Austria to join the NATO. I think that we are quite realistic on that. And this kind of a status quo will probably be kept for forthcoming years as well. While there's another issue, and this is the development of European defensive, let's say, capabilities. The Czech Republic is participating in these, let's say, projects or initiatives like PESCO projects, but in our national security defense strategy, it clearly says that the major guarantee of our security is the NATO. So the EU capacities should only complement to the ones that we are having within the NATO.
David, Austrian state-owned energy company OMV is one of the key stakeholders and participants in Nord Stream 2 project. When President Zelensky last September was in Austria, in Vienna, he was asking the Austrian leadership to end Nord Stream 2 and the participation of OMV. Unfortunately, this was rejected by the Austrian state president and by the Austrian prime minister. Do you think that Nord Stream 2 and the Austrian participation is very good for European solidarity? And what is your position on Nord Stream 2?
I mean, again, there are two aspects, geopolitical aspects and economic aspects or energy aspects. Definitely, European companies need to receive gas whenever it comes, right? And here the EU, some EU member states are heavily dependent on the deliveries of Russian gas. So that's the economic energy aspect. Then there's this very important geopolitical aspect that Russians use gas as the foreign policy tool at the cost of countries like Ukraine, partly also Belarus, but definitely Poland and some Central European countries like Slovakia. So this is a reason why we see the EU so disunited on this issue. For some, this is business. For some, it's a matter of the national security. Surprisingly, the Czech Republic is somewhere in between, because there are two interconnectors, Gazelle and one more interconnector that was just completed, that should bring the Russian gas to the Czech Republic, but from the Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2. So in our, let's say, energy policy, there is an interest to receive the gas through Nord Stream 2. In political aspects, we are kind of, I mean, the Czech position is a little bit schizophrenic here, because in the political and geopolitical aspects, we are supporting Ukraine and Poland, but economically, we want to receive that gas. So what I think would be the best option, and this is what, for example, Germany is proposing, is to guarantee a certain numbers and quantities of gas to be still delivered through the gas transport system that runs through Ukraine, because this is the cheapest way. But of course, there need to be some, let's say, investments done, because that system is a little bit outdated. And then why not to use Nord Stream 2? I mean, this is the German position, to use Nord Stream 2, but in accordance with the acquis communautaire, with the paragraphs of the third energy package. That means that Gazprom would be able to use only half of the capacity of Nord Stream 2, because the second half should be guaranteed for any third operators and traders with gas. And again, this will significantly decrease the economic profitability of Nord Stream 2, because you will have less gas to run through Nord Stream 2, and you will have still the fixed costs that you will be dividing into a smaller amount of gas. So that would make the gas transportation through Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 more expensive than to have it done through the territory of Ukraine. And again, this would be the economic aspect, that for the buyers of the Russian gas, of course, they are interested in receiving a cheaper gas. So in that way, I think some sort of a compromise could be found. And we'll see how it is all happen, because the Americans are also rather using geopolitical, let's say, considerations in their sanctions policy towards also possibly European companies that are participating in Nord Stream 2. And here your EMV might be a target of these sanctions, though I don't think this is going to happen, because still the US administration is trying to find a kind of a compromise with its EU partners. But also the Americans are interested in bringing their liquefied gas to Europe. So for them, it's also a part of it is a little bit economic. So we'll see how this all is going to happen. Yeah, so I'll stop here.
We have a new president in America. He was now very busy to reform America, and with the pandemic and with the rescue package, but now is entering the phase where he will also make decisive moves on the international scene. In 6 weeks, he will come to Europe to visit the G7 and the EU summit and the NATO summit in the mid of June. I think it will be on the 14th, 16th, this way. And what is your expectations? What will be the demands and requests from the American president for European solidarity with the Czech Republic, for European unity in NATO, and all these important issues coming up now in the 6 weeks ahead of the NATO summit?
I think that after those years of Trump's administration, we'll see a kind of a return to normality in these transatlantic links. But anyway, I think that Americans would, for example, be expecting their European partners to be more, let's say, principled on China, for example, on the trade with China. They will definitely still be continuing their demands that within the NATO member states would be spending those 2% of the GDP, which most of the European members of the NATO don't do. So I think here the Americans will be kind of continuing their demands that all partners share more or less equally the cost of these collective defense systems. Definitely, the new administration will be more, I would say, principled towards Russia. And here I think that we'll see more coordinated steps and decisions between the EU and the Americans, like it was before the Trump's administration. So for Russians, this is definitely not a good news that they would face this kind of a strengthened transatlantic links between the US and the EU. And I would even say that we might see some sort of efforts to reopen the talks on that transatlantic trade and investment package, which failed. So I think, again, this kind of a prospect of creating the largest global trade zone between the US and then maybe partly NAFTA countries and the EU, it's a very, I would say, tempting idea. So we'll see whether this issue will be reopened again, with of course taking all the mistakes into account that were made in the past. So I would say that the relations will be definitely more efficient, more frequent, more pragmatic, which I think also is the only positive development that we could think of.
On the principal conclusion out of this whole crisis now from 2014 with Ukraine and with Russia and now with the Czech Republic as well, do you think that because we start now the conference on the future of Europe on the 9th of May, do you think it's necessary to have a more united European Union in terms of foreign policy?
I think it's impossible. Practically, it's not possible because we are so many, we are so different. We are not homogeneous. Take, for example, the Southern European countries, their interests are in the Mediterranean or in Latin America. And that's something that the Eastern members of the EU are absolutely kind of not thinking about, right? So in that regard, this kind of a wishful shared feeling of solidarity is still far from, I mean, the reality is far from the ideal state. And as long as we have the unanimity principle in the decision-making on the foreign policy issues, I think we are not going to see more effective EU foreign policy because simply the interests are really so divergent. Let's take, for example, the case with the introduction of sanctions against the Belarusian regime after these brutal, violent scenes in Minsk and other Belarusian cities. And it took such a long time because Cyprus wanted the other member states to introduce the sanctions on Turkey for possible exploration of gas stocks in the Mediterranean Sea. So as long as we kind of don't have a shared feeling of identity or solidarity, that what is important for the Cypriots is equally or similarly important for Poles, Czechs, Estonians, and then as long as Cypriots, Maltese or Spaniards don't think that Russia is a threat to the Eastern members like Baltic states, then we can't think about a more effective practical EU foreign policy. It will be a sort of a lowest common denominator of particular interests of individual countries.
David, one last question. Austria is a bit alone in some of its position. Do you see a chance that Austria can join the Visegrad countries and learn a bit from foreign policy of your courageous position and adopt a more reasonable foreign policy in the coming years and by being a member of the Visegrad 4 and then 5?
I think this is a very tempting idea because Austria historically, culturally, I would say even politically, perfectly fits into this group. The question is whether the Austrian government and the Austrian public is willing to do that, as well as whether these four countries are kind of willing to extend their ranks. And I don't see here too many, let's say, incentives or promising moves in that direction. I think what we might see would be, for example, the V4 different official meetings, summits, to which Austrian representatives would be invited as guests. But I don't think at the level of institutionalization of these relations, we would see the enlargement of V4 to V5. I think the practical benefits of that probably are lower than, let's say, the symbolic or, let's say, a value-based benefits, right? I would wish that we have also Austria on board, but from the practical point of view, I think is still kind of a maybe an issue for the future decisions.
Thanks a lot. I would like now to close the interview and express also thanks a lot for your time to talk to Pax Europiana. Also, I would like to say solidarity. There's many people in Austria who are in full solidarity with the Czech Republic, with the Czech people now in this crisis. And I hope that this courageous position will continue. And I hope that all Europe and NATO is united behind your position in this crisis. And thanks a lot for David Stulik from the European Values Center for this excellent interview. And thanks a lot for talking to Pax Europiana, and all the best in the coming years. And please invite Austria to Visegrad.
Yeah. If I'm in these important positions where I can make the decision, I would definitely. This is my promise. And also thank you for your time and for your interest, and especially for these expressions of solidarity. They are indeed extremely important for the people here. It is very much appreciated, and I think that this can bring us closer to the ideal kind of a state of play when this solidarity is felt almost every day and at many occasions on many issues. So thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for the courageous Czech Republic and the leadership. David, all the best to Prague from Vienna. Thanks for
You
talking
too.
to us.
Have a nice day. Bye-bye.